There's a reason you feel compelled to explain yourself early, why you want to tell your story before anybody asks, why silence feels dishonest instead of spacious. That urge has nothing to do with transparency and everything to do with how your nervous system learned to survive connection. After abuse, disclosure feels like safety. You believe that if someone knows where you've been hurt, they will not hurt you again. You want to believe that if you explain yourself clearly enough, you will not be misunderstood, rejected, or abandoned. You want to believe that honesty will protect you from harm, and that belief makes sense, but it is also dangerous. Trauma disclosure is not intimacy, it is information, and information creates leverage. Early disclosure does not deepen connection, it collapses polarity, accelerates emotional closeness before trust exists, and removes your ability to observe who someone actually is without the influence from your pain. This episode is not here to shame you for sharing, it is here to wake you up to what sharing does too early and why restraint is not fear, it is self-respect. If somebody needs your wounds to understand you, they are not ready for your standards. I'm Meaghan Webster, I'm an abuse recovery coach, a trauma-informed strategist, and the woman a narcissist hopes to never meet twice. This is the Narcissist Worst Nightmare podcast, where women stop explaining themselves into danger and start choosing from discernment, self-trust, and power. Today, I'm sharing with you why you don't tell new partners about your trauma, not because you are hiding, not because you are ashamed, but because access is earned, not granted through confession. Most women believe they're sharing their trauma because they are healed. They're no longer shaking. They are not crying while they say it. They assume that because the story can be told calmly, it's become neutral. It has not. Being able to tell the story without falling apart does not mean the body is no longer orienting around it. It means you've learned to regulate while recounting it. Regulation is not neutrality, it is control. And control is still a survival response when it comes to connection. Early trauma disclosure in dating is rarely about connection. It's about regulation. Your body is trying to establish safety by explaining itself before it's being challenged. You're attempting to prevent harm by offering context in advance, hoping the other person will adjust around your wounds. That is not intimacy. It is a survival strategy disguised as honesty. This impulse is not random. It comes from a system that learned harm can be reduced by being understood quickly. If they know why you react, they will be gentler. If they know what you survived, they will be careful. If they know your history, they won't repeat it. That logic once made sense. It does not belong in dating. When you disclose early, you are effectively saying, here's where I've been hurt, please be careful with me. That may feel mature, but what you're actually doing is orienting the connection around your vulnerability instead of your standards. You're asking to be accommodated rather than observed. Accommodation can feel like safety to a traumatized nervous system. Observation feels like risk, but observation is where your discernment lives. When you lead with vulnerability, you remove your ability to see how somebody behaves without influence. You turn yourself into a context problem instead of a woman with preferences, limits, and power. Intimacy grows through consistency, not confession. Safety is built through behavior, not background stories. A healthy partner does not need your trauma narrative to treat you with respect. If they do, that is not understanding, it is conditional decency. If you have to explain your pain to receive care, you are not being met, you are being managed. Power in dating is not dominance, it is leverage, optionality, and discernment. It is the ability to observe without rushing to attach meaning. It is the ability to remain self-referenced while attraction is present. The moment you disclose trauma early, you tilt the power dynamic. You give someone emotional context they did not earn and cannot yet hold responsibility for. You allow them to position themselves as safe before they have demonstrated safety to you. This matters because power is not about control over another person. It is about maintaining choice within yourself. Early disclosure narrows that choice by shaping how the other person perceives you before you have even shown them. This creates false intimacy. That can feel close, but it's built on acceleration rather than evidence. It shortcuts the process that allows you to observe how someone behaves in neutrality. It removes the friction that would otherwise reveal character. Friction is not bad. It shows you how somebody handles disappointment, pacing, boundaries, and difference. When you overshare, you soften friction prematurely. You invite caretaking instead of accountability. You collapse the testing ground before it's done its job. Unsafe people are drawn to early disclosure, not because they care, but because it gives them a blueprint. They learn what makes you doubt yourself. They learn what triggers overexplaining, guilt, fear, or collapse. Even subtle abusers unconsciously adjust once they know where your pain lives. This is not always malicious. Sometimes it's simply opportunistic. But the effect is the same. Your inner world becomes something to navigate instead of something to earn access to. That does not make you foolish. It just means that you are trained to earn safety through vulnerability. But in dating, vulnerability with discernment is exposure. Here's a hard truth for you. Power leaks the moment your pain becomes a bargaining chip for connection. Safe men do not need your story, and this is where a lot of women are going to push back. They say the right man will understand. They say they do not want to waste time with someone who cannot handle their past. They say they are not ashamed of what they've been through. Of course, you should not be ashamed, but here is your truth. A safe man does not need your trauma story to be kind. He does not need your history to respect your boundaries. He does not need your wounds to show up consistently. Safety is not something you unlock by explaining yourself. It is something someone demonstrates before they are given deeper access. A man who is emotionally healthy treats women well as a baseline, not as a response to disclosure. If someone only treats you well after you explain why you're sensitive, that is not emotional intelligence, it's selective empathy. It means care is contingent on context rather than character. Real safety shows up before disclosure. It is visible in pacing, listening, consistency, accountability, and how somebody responds to limits without explanation. It shows up in how they handle a no, a pause, or a boundary that does not come with justification. You do not need to narrate your survival to be treated properly. You do not need to earn patience by revealing pain. You do not need to prove depth by recounting damage. If respect depends on disclosure, it's not respect, it's performance. If a man needs your trauma to understand how to treat you, he is not relating to you, he is managing information. When I first met my now ex-husband, we were long distance, and of course, naturally, the conversation came up about past relationships. I was about 6 months out from leaving my narcissistic, abusive ex-boyfriend, and at that time, I was in AA where they were welcoming to share if it pertains to your alcoholism and healing. I had no issue sharing my experience with him because it came across as genuine curiosity. But once I used the word abusive, it felt like an interrogation. What was done? What was said? How did it look? Were the police involved? He wanted the whole story all at once. At the time, I didn't think much of it. It came across as concern and care. Hindsight is a beautiful thing. When I moved to New Brunswick to be with my now ex-husband, the day I arrived, the abuse had started. Both of the relationships that I'd been in with narcissists looked different but had very common similarities. What I can see very clearly now was me sharing my trauma at that level so early on gave him a handbook to the threshold of abuse that I would accept. He always managed to stay just a hair under it. And the reason why I'm speaking about this on this episode with you is not just my own experience, but many of my clients inside of the RRR membership shared with me that their abusers had also created a false sense of safety, asking them to share about previous traumatic experiences, which opened up wounds and gave them essentially a playbook of what abuse they could do with little to no recognition. Now, will everyone use your trauma against you? No, of course not. But if you haven't healed a pattern and continue to date similar same men, they absolutely will. The other side of the coin in this, which society likes to call trauma dumping, even when it's asked for, is how oversharing kills attraction without you even realizing. Attraction requires polarity. Polarity requires mystery. Mystery requires time. When you share trauma too early, you collapse polarity by asking to be held instead of being met. You shift the dynamic from mutual discovery to emotional caretaking, and even emotionally healthy men feel that shift as pressure rather than closeness. Caretaking is not erotic, it is stabilizing. Stabilization has a place, but it is not the foundation of attraction in early dating. When connection centers around your wounds instead of your presence, polarity thins out. You may feel relief because you've explained yourself. The connection may feel intense, but intensity is not attraction, it is activation. Activation feels alive because it mirrors familiar nervous system states. It creates urgency, bonding, and an emotional charge. Attraction, on the other hand, grows slowly. It's built through curiosity, contrast, and the unknown. Attraction grows when two grounded people meet without urgency. It thrives on curiosity rather than explanation. When trauma enters too early, curiosity dies because the narrative is already written. There's nothing left to discover, and the story has replaced the experience. Oversharing does not make you deeper, it makes the dynamic heavier before it's stable. Heavy is not the same as meaningful. If attraction fades the moment you stop explaining it was never attraction, it was a nervous system intensity wearing a romantic costume. So what does earned safety look like? Earned safety is boring to a nervous system still trained on chaos. It does not announce itself, it does not rush intimacy, it demands disclosure. It shows up quietly, consistently, and without needing access to your pain to justify decent behavior. It looks like someone respecting your pace without asking why. It looks like interest that remains steady even when you do not offer vulnerability as a currency. It looks like consistency that does not fluctuate based on how open, emotional, or accommodating you're being that day. It looks like boundaries being met without interrogation and needs being honored without requiring a backstory. Safe people do not ask you to prove your depth through suffering. They do not need to see your scars to treat you well. They let time do the work. They let behavior speak. They allow trust to accumulate slowly rather than extracting intimacy early to fast-track closeness. This is where a lot of my clients will get uncomfortable because earned safety removes the familiar exchange. They are no longer offering pain in return for care. They're no longer using vulnerability to anchor a connection. You are simply existing and watching what someone does with that. This is why early disclosure interferes with discernment. When someone knows your trauma, their behavior is no longer clean data. You cannot tell if they are kind because of who they are or because of what they're responding to in your story. You cannot tell if they are patient because they are regulated or because they're managing your wounds. Earned safety requires space. It requires letting someone show you who they are when nothing is being asked of them emotionally. It requires resisting the urge to explain yourself into being understood instead of letting behavior do the understanding for you. If safety disappears the moment you stop explaining, it was not safety, it was accommodation. I had a client in the Black Cat Academy who told me she was so proud of how honest she was on dates. She believed that her transparency was one of her greatest strengths. On a second date, she shared the details of a past relationship, including the way she had been manipulated and blamed. The man listened attentively, validated her pain, and told her how strong she was. She felt seen. Within weeks, she noticed subtle shifts. He began framing disagreements around her triggers. When she expressed discomfort, he reminded her of her past sensitivity. When she questioned his behavior, he referenced her history as context for why she might be misinterpreting things. Nothing he did was overt. That was the problem. Her own story had been turned into a lens through which her perceptions were dismissed. When we unpacked it together, the realization landed hard. She had given him interpretive authority way too early. He did not have to earn trust. He had been handed leverage through vulnerability that felt empowering at the time. The lesson was not that she should never share. It was that sharing without evidence had removed her ability to stay oriented to herself. If this is a way you've been operating in dating, not telling your trauma story early does not mean you are becoming closed. It means you're becoming selective. It means allowing connection to unfold without front-loading vulnerability as proof of sincerity or depth. Pace disclosure begins when letting your nervous system tolerate not immediately being understood. That discomfort is not danger, it is unfamiliarity. And after abuse, that feels threatening because your system learned that closeness was maintained through explanation, appeasement, and emotional access. This is where most women panic. Silence feels dishonest. Restraint feels like hiding. In reality, you are simply no longer overfunctioning emotionally for connection. You are allowed to share in layers, or speak in present language instead of historical detail, or to say you value consistency without explaining what inconsistency costs you. You're allowed to name preferences without narrating the trauma that created them. Pacing is not withholding, it is self-leadership. You're leading the connection towards reality instead of intensity. You are giving attraction room to breathe, formed based on experience rather than emotional disclosure. You're letting your nervous system learn that you can stay connected without oversharing, fixing, or preempting rejection. Pay attention to what happens when you say less. If someone pressures you for disclosure, that is data for you. If someone becomes distant when you do not emotionally expose yourself, that is data for you. If someone respects your pace without needing context, that is data for you. Discernment does not live in what you share, it lives in how someone responds when you don't. Restraint after abuse is often mislabeled as guardedness. It's not. Guardedness is closed off. Restraint is choice. It is discernment applied in real time while attraction is active. When you stop telling your trauma story early, you are not denying your past. You are refusing to let it lead the connection. You are no longer organizing intimacy around what hurt you. You are allowing who you are now to be met without distortion, pity, or projection. Sovereignty in dating means your inner world is not public property. It means access is earned through consistency, not chemistry. That your story is shared when safety has been demonstrated repeatedly, not when someone seems interested enough to hear it. This is where power quietly returns to you. You stop auditioning for understanding. You stop explaining your reactions in advance. You stop making your pain legible so others can handle you more easily. You let people meet you where you are, not where you're broken. So you're not too much for wanting to protect yourself. You are calibrated. You are no longer confusing exposure with intimacy or vulnerability with value. Restraint is not fear. It is self-trust in motion. You do not owe anyone the story of how you survived in order to be chosen. You do not need to offer your wounds as proof of depth. You are allowed to be known slowly, to be met in present. If someone needs your trauma to understand you, they are not ready for your standards. And if someone respects you without knowing your pain, that is where discernment begins. If this episode cracks something open in you, good. That means you're waking up to where you've been giving access instead of requiring evidence. Please share this with another woman who needs to hear that restraint is not fear. Hit follow so you don't miss what's next. And I know you're ready to deepen your discernment and dating power inside of the Black Cat Academy. That is where the real work begins. For the woman who knows she has layers to peel back to expose old wiring, to repair her relationship with herself, heal wounds that surface while trying to date after abuse so she can finally feel secure in when and how to share past experiences so it doesn't become a targeted attack. This is the Narcissist's Worst Nightmare podcast, where I share the truth on relational trauma and nervous system healing that actually works so you can set yourself free and truly attract safe and sacred love.